Hello, BookTube. We're continuing on with my 2023 library tour. We are getting to the bottom of this tall, custom-made bookcase. We're still dealing with Penguin Classics for the most part. So let's look at this. This is the Rex Warner translation of The History of My Times by Xenophon. Once again, a sturdy, wonderfully erudite translation, tons and tons of great Penguin notes, but again, this gets back to my idea that for regular standard reprints like Dover or Bantam or Oxford or Penguin, no matter how good the introduction or the critical notes are, I view these as, since they're all sort of a set, it's a line of Penguin classics. I view them as sort of the bedrock DNA of the classics that I really like. So for the classics that I don't really like, the ones that I like but that I don't really like, Penguin Classic is just fine. But for all others, I want the Penguin Classic, and maybe in the case of Greek and Roman classics, I want the Loeb as well. But I want also a better edition, a nicer, something that I like better. And Xenophon has one of those, so this is something that I would consult only comparatively. Okay, then we've seen this already. This is the Penguin mass market of The Praise of Folly by Erasmus. This is his scathing, wonderfully funny, sarcastic assessment of the abuses of the church of his day, but also of the reign of foolishness. How folly is the queen of all. Folly rules the world. To put it mildly, a perennial message. Okay, then this next one's not a Penguin classic, although someday. This is The Lord of the Rings, which for some reason is down here and shouldn't be, so I'm not going to put it back on the shelf. This is a rarity. This thing came out probably 20 years ago, this particular volume. And it's a rarity in that it is a movie or a TV released item, right? When some studio or corporation lays out a huge amount of money for an intellectual property, for source material, and then they adapt it and horribly mutilate it, they always come out with a book. And it's just sort of shorthand. It's just sort of universally acknowledged in the reading world that the movie version of a book is going to look ugly. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be a cheap thing with an out-of-focus publicity still on the cover, which was what surprised me about this one, because this is really, really nice. That is an in-focus picture of the ring on Sauron's burnt and corrupted hand. The lettering is embossed and looks really good. There are French flaps. The end papers are a map. Ordinarily, you don't get a movie version that looks like this. In fact, there's a one-volume trade paperback of the Lord of the Rings that was meant to coincide with Peter Jackson's movies. That's really ugly. It's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I'm sure you've seen it. You probably own a copy. It's an out-of-focus publicity still of one Nazgul in the distance, a sort of blurry figure on a horse, and that's it. No enticement whatsoever. No, to read the book, no craft put into it at all. But this is nice. It just doesn't belong here. That's all. It doesn't belong here. Then we have Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition. This is one of their earliest and one of their most popular, and justifiably so. This belongs in your collection. This is an amazing thing. This is the Sagas of the Icelanders, with a beautiful cover that also has, I don't know if you can see it, this trace work, sort of faded trace work on it. It's got the deckled edges and the French flaps, and it is a collection of Icelandic sagas. It really is a Penguin volume to have, even if you're not, all in on the Icelandic sagas. I obviously am, since I have them all. But even so, okay, all right. This next one is the Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition. We're going way back here. This is Lydia Davis's translation of Swan's Way by Marcel Proust. We saw Finding Time Again. Penguin did a whole new Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition with the deckled edges and the French flaps, in this case, extremely French flaps. They did the whole of In Search of Lost Time in these new editions, new translations, new introductions, and whatnot. I just recently got the last volume, Finding Time Again, and this is the first one. And there are a bunch of others that I have along the way. I've got them all for all of Proust in Penguin. God help us. Then we have another Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition that is also very much worth your time. Unlike Sagas of the Icelanders, which I believe will get to you no matter what, even if you think, oh, I'm not a saga type person, or I don't really care about history. I believe when you're reading Sagas of the Icelanders, you'll quickly fall under the spell of Odin and you'll be a fan for life. This Penguin Classic is also beautiful. I'm not going to rank it as a must-have because the author might not gel with you. This is the Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition of Dorothy Parker. A lovely thing, cartoon cover, cartoon back. All the Penguin Classic Deluxe Editions all have original artwork everywhere that artwork can go. So the front, the back, and the flaps. And this is a big, the most generous collection of Dorothy Parker that exists, and certainly the most generous one that Penguin has ever done. The Viking Portable Dorothy Parker is a great anthology and made Viking a lot of money. It sold better than almost any other Viking Portable edition. And it went through a few editions. This is even bigger than those Viking Portables, so it's just a question of whether or not you get along with Dorothy Parker, and you might not. Okay, we have a double now. Another Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition. This is the complete novels of Jane Austen. And this is my beater edition. I showed you my clean edition. This is there's tons of reviews all stuck through it. You can always count on the book reviews to run something on Jane Austen on a regular basis, and I keep them all because they're all worth revisiting. Almost all worth revisiting. If the literary review in question is running a piece on Jane Austen and there is an idiomatic cuss word or a cuss expression in the title of the piece, you can safely disregard it. It was written by an idiot. But usually that's not true. So this has tons and tons of pieces in it that I don't put in my clean version. I go back to this all the time. You can often find this, in fact, on my nightstand as I am revisiting Jane Austen for one reason or another. Let's see what we have next here. Okay, this is the Peter Wiggum translation of the Poems of Catullus. We've already seen this in the trade paperback. Is this the trade paperback? Yes, we've already seen this. So this is a double, and I conscientiously went through my Penguins just a little while ago to get rid of doubles. So I'm not sure. I mean, let's take a look at this thing actually while I'm making this. This I got 10 years ago. Has no clippings in it. It has no annotations in it. Okay, all right. This is the Penguin Classic Poems of Catullus. So this is not good. This means I have 3 copies of this in Penguin Classic. That is not good. Then we have Moby Dick, Herman Melville. This is edited by Harold Beaver, and this is widely considered the great 19th century American novel, and I have it in many different forms. I have a great number of Moby Dick editions. Sometimes nothing really beats the little, this is reinforced and really battered because this used to be my only Moby Dick. And before this, it was the Orange Spine Penguin Classic, but Moby Dick. Sometimes there's nothing that quite beats the heft of that in the hand. Okay, then we have something that's not a Penguin Classic. So again, this is going to go somewhere. This is a tiny little free version of the NIV. This is not the version of the NIV that I want, but I do want a version of the NIV. I just saw this free and couldn't pass it up. Okay, then we have the Rosemary Edmonds translation of War and Peace in a very battered Penguin trade paperback from 1982. This Penguin is not from 1982, but this copy of mine is from 1982. That's a long time ago. That's 40 years ago. And Rosemary Edmonds' translation is the one that I like the most, so I have it in a mass market. I think I have it in a trade paperback as well. Although War and Peace is one of those books where I get nice editions whenever I find them. I don't care how many I have. Okay. Here we have another edition of Middlemarch. We've already seen this. This is George Eliot's novel Middlemarch, and we have a big trade paperback of it. Here's the mass market paperback, also beaten all to hell and gone, because once upon a time, these Penguin Classics were not only the DNA, the common DNA of the classics that I love, but they were also my only copy of these classics. Once upon a time, for a long time, my book collection, just in toto, was pretty much the books we've been looking at these last few days, and nothing else. I just went back to them over and over and over and over and over again until I knew them backwards and forwards, and still go back to them because they are endless. They are absolutely endless. Okay, speaking of endless, here is another. This is a triple. This is a triple. Yes, I'm looking at them right now. This is the Penguin Classic King James Bible. It's great. It's a great volume, really fantastic, but I should not have 3 copies of it. Absolutely not. Okay, then we have the big Penguin trade paperback of Black Lamb and Gray Falcon by Rebecca West, with an introduction by Christopher Hitchens. Big, beautiful thing with a very crucial piece of real estate there on the cover, crucial to the narrative. This is a big, sprawling book, but it casts a spell. You might look at this and be just as intimidated as you might have been by Samuel Richardson's Clarissa, which is about the same size in Penguin Classic, but this is much more gripping. A really brilliant, one of the brilliant works of narrative nonfiction in the 20th century. Okay, we go. All right, we go from something absolutely enormous to something absolutely tiny. These are the Penguin 60s. The Penguin Classics had their 60th anniversary. They came out with a whole bunch of tiny little books. I had a lot of them at one point. I don't think I have any other than this one right now. But the thing is, when they show up at a used bookstore or at a charity shop or something, they'll show up by the hundreds. So if I want to get them all, I can. This is Beowulf and Grendel. Just Beowulf and Grendel. That's all. This is probably Michael Alexander. They probably just carved it. Yeah, Michael Alexander. They carved this out of his translation. It's just Beowulf and Grendel. And the Penguin 60s all did this. Okay, then we have something that's, this is a Penguin Classic Deluxe edition of, this is a centennial edition of East of Eden by John Steinbeck. Lovely, lovely, indestructible edition of the French flaps and all. Just a lovely thing. These Penguin Classic Deluxe editions, they aren't cheap, unless you find them used. But you get your money's worth. You really do. And we're going to move on here. We've got some Transwise books. This is Peter Green's translation of the Satires of Juvenal. Very good. Peter Green is a really good classicist. So the introduction here and the notes are fantastic. The translations themselves, how do you do that? How do you translate Juvenal? I don't know. Once upon a time, I was very, very boosterish about the English language and about the art of translation itself. And once upon a time, I would have vigorously argued with you if you told me that things were untranslatable, that anything is untranslatable. I would have said, if you're saying that, all you're doing is confessing that you don't know your target language well enough. I don't say that quite so readily anymore. Juvenal would be a perfect example of why. Let's see here. Oh, okay, then we have another one in this Penguin series. This is Juvenal in English, where you get all of the satires, but with multiple translator hands. This is a series that Penguin did that I just loved. I rejoiced in it. I handed it to a lot of young people who wanted to know that age-old question, right? If you're a monoglot reader, or even if you're not a monoglot reader, but you don't have ancient Latin or ancient Greek, you're going to look at the classics of ancient Greece and Rome, and you're going to say, well, okay, but how much of this is the translator? I don't know, and I want to know. I'm not conspiracy theory or anything, but I want to know how much of them is what I'm reading as opposed to how much of the author. And when you get Peter Wigham's translation of Catullus or Peter Green's translation of Juvenal, you'll never know that because it's the same person translating all of them. Whereas with these, you get dozens of translators. And if you read them rapid fire, you will quickly get a sense of, oddly enough, believe it or not, you will quickly get a sense of what the actual author is like. You'll get a sense in a volume like that of exactly what kind of liberties a translator will and won't take. Right? So if you're getting an eyewitness description of a bank robber from 6 people, you're automatically going to pay attention to the 4 features they all describe. There'll be variation, but if they're all describing 4 features identically, well, that tells you a lot. And that's what this series was great for, so I grabbed a lot of them. And then we have the big pen classic of 4 Tragedies of William Shakespeare. This book is, of course, very useful. I've said many times on this channel, I don't agree with this traditional 80-year-old grouping of the 4 great tragedies of William Shakespeare, because Othello is in the mix, and I don't think Othello should be. I think it's a really weak play. I think for sure either Julius Caesar or Romeo and Juliet should be on this list instead of Othello in all the groupings, but you'll never see that whenever the 4 tragedies are grouped together. It's always these 4. I love this Penguin volume anyway, but partly with aggression, partly with irritation, because every Penguin classic or every Shakespeare play should have its own black spine Penguin classic. Every single one of them should be in one of these. With introduction, extensive notes, maybe tons of literary criticism. Every one of them should have that. There should also be a big, fat Penguin Classic Collected Shakespeare. The Penguin Classic Complete Shakespeare in a volume that looks just like this, with a penguin banner there at the bottom. There should also be a Penguin Classic of the first folio of Shakespeare, with, again, a dedicated introduction and tons of notes. Shakespeare should be all over the Penguin Classic line, and instead, he's not, for reasons that pass my understanding. He's not. If there were Penguin Classics of every individual Shakespeare play, schools would order nothing else. That would be the only thing they do. You would be guaranteeing yourself a bottom line, and Penguin, in this country, has never done it. So this is as close as we get. The 4 tragedies and also a couple of volumes of poetry. Very annoying. So we're doing Transwise books here just to get this over with. Okay, this is Reginald Rose. This is 12 Angry Men, a Penguin Classic of a great play. Then we have, oh goodness, you have a pub sheet in you and everything. This is more John O'Hara. This is the New York stories. I wrote about this or a couple of other John O'Hara's in Penguin Classic, and the review came out well. If I remember, I'll try to list it down below. No more John O'Hara. This is Butterfield 8. They can't, I don't think Penguin has any plans to reprint all of John O'Hara. That'd be a huge undertaking, but I can kind of wish it. Then we have the Penguin Classic of the Dryden Aeneid, which I have in a couple of other formats here, but it's always nice to have the Penguin critical apparatus of Dryden doing Dryden on the Aeneid, and I think doing it wonderfully. I think his Aeneid is a beautiful, powerful English language poem, so that if you picked it up in let's say a Dover Classic reprint with no critical apparatus whatsoever, so you had no idea what it was, you thought John Dryden was the author of the book, you would think that is an amazingly powerful English poem, far more powerful, I hope you're sitting down, than Paradise Lost. but now largely forgotten, unfortunately, because it's got the double kiss of death. It's Virgil and it's also Dryden. Then Speak of the Devil. This is the Robert Fitzgerald translation of the Aeneid, and I have this in the original hardcover that came out before it got adopted into the Penguin Classic line. So this is a perfect example again of a book being a kind of a literary DNA. I have this in the Penguin along with everything else in the Penguin, but I went looking for the edition that I wanted. And then we have another gigantic thing, another fat Penguin Classic. It's not the complete Shakespeare. Should be, but it's not. Instead, it's The Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser. This is a heavily reinforced trade paperback. Some of you, if you have been around long enough, will remember the video I made of reinforcing this book. I'll try to remember to leave a link to it down below, but Penguin did this in a mass market, brick, forever and ever before they switched it to trade. Don't know if they make it anymore. The Fairy Queen doesn't have much of a readership outside of David Wiley anymore. Then we have a digest of Justinian law. This is translated by C.F. Colbert. Thin little thing. The Emperor Justinian codified Roman law and tried to regularize it and popularized it. He didn't just do that, in the palace. He also made sure that people knew he was doing it and had the digest written and printed and, disseminated all over his empire to show that you will get a fair shake, to quell civil unrest by saying, I am not an unjust ruler. And it's fascinating. We don't know for 100% sure how many of those strictures were honored in the breach, but it's still fascinating to read. Then we have a Socrates book, but not written by Plato. This is Xenophon's book on Socrates, who was also Xenophon's teacher. And it's a fascinating counterpoint to all the flapdoodle that Plato comes out with on the subject. Okay, then here's another thing. We saw this, we've seen these a few times, but when the disastrous Peter Jackson Hobbit movies were coming out, Penguin repackaged a bunch of their Old English and Ancient Norse classics and gave them a sort of a redesigned cover and brought them out that way. And this is another one of those. I know I have them all. I just don't have them all together. This is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And this is the Bernard O'Donoghue translation, which is excellent, as you would expect. Then we have Livy. This is The War with Hannibal, a trade paperback of Aubrey de Selincourt's translation of the Second Punic War books of Livy, the point where Livy really hits his height in terms of narrative ability, at least that we know of. We have Hesiod's Works and Days, translated by A.E. Stallings, who we've seen already, a wonderful classic translator, just wonderful. Skinny little thing, but revered and consulted because of how incredibly old it is. much like myself. Then we have The Murder Trials of Cicero. This is a translation by Michael Grant. And these are the summations, the speeches that Cicero wrote out and presumably in some form or other delivered in some of his famous murder trials. He was a famous advocate in the Roman legal system. And they make for surprisingly gripping reading. It's no surprise to me that so many Roman historical novelists have used these texts as blueprints for kind of, well, let's make this a murder mystery, and this is the end point. We know that this is the end point. Let's figure out what really happened in any of these cases. Really, really interesting stuff. Then we have the Penguin Classic Kalevala. This is a long time in the coming. This is translated. Who does this? Translated by Jukka Korpela? No, by Aino Freiberg. These non-Irish names, I swear. This is a bit weird to get into, more than a bit weird. But before this Penguin Classic, the only version that you really had readily available was Oxford. Now you've got the two. Then we have another in this series. This is Martial in English, the Roman poet Martial. Again, not quite as bad as Juvenal or Propertius, but still definitely now tickles my can you really translate it instincts. As I'm not 100% sure. Martial is a lot simpler than those other poets, but even so, I don't know. But this is still fascinating in the same way because it gives you a wide array of things of versions of translation to look for. Okay, then we have the Iliad, but this is translated by Robert Graves, The Anger of Achilles, and it's very much a Robert Graves production. It's a translation of the Iliad technically, but it's very much a Robert Graves production. And this has to be the birth child of passion at Penguin Classics somewhere. This came out like 30 years ago. This has to be someone's passion project. It had to be. Because otherwise, who remembers that Robert Graves translated this? Who even knows? It had a mass market paperback a million years ago. And I loved it. I loved seeing it. I went through it when I got it. But again, it's a source of minor irritation. Because if you can do this, well, then can't you do Chapman? Can't Penguin do Chapman's Iliad and Odyssey? Why do I have to go afield to an academic press for Chapman's Homer when I should be able to go to Penguin for that? Chapman's Homer was immensely influential. Why not do, in fact, a big fat volume as big as this and call it Chapman's Homer? But anyway, it's better than nothing, that's for sure. Then we have a double. This is the early history of Rome. This is not only a double in terms of the content, it's also a double in terms of the exact edition. I have 2 exact copies of this book, at least 2 that I know of. I thought I went through these and got rid of that sort of thing. I'm going to have to do it again. That's one of the benefits of the library tours, that you go through and take better control of your collection. Okay, this is the Pope translation of the Iliad. Perfect example of what I'm talking about. Here we have Robert Graves. Here we have Alexander Pope. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to acknowledge, if the Penguin Classic line is going to acknowledge that different translations of works can also be works of art on their own and deserve their own Penguin Classic, then let's spread the love a little, shall we? Let's spread the love a little. Let's get Chapman in the Penguin line. That would be great. I would certainly like to see Chapman's Homer before Emily Wilson's Homer, and I know that I won't. I know that won't happen. Okay, then we have Rome and Italy. This is another exact duplicate. Not good. Not good. Oh, okay. This is also a duplicate. I think we've seen this already. This is the Ryu translation of the Iliad for Penguin Classics. This is a trade paperback. I have the, here it is. I have the mass market that shows Thunderbolt striking the battlefield. This is much more boring looking, but it's the same thing. So that also is a duplicate. Okay. We have Homer in English. Passages from Homer with a whole bunch of different translators give you an idea of who you might like. We have the Psalms in English. We had an individual volume of the Psalms that we saw a couple of days ago, and now we have this. So that if you get to a famous psalm, "The Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want," you're going to get 6 people translating that, and you're going to get to see right there on the page the kind of variation that a translator can work in without flagrantly violating the work. Then we have Ovid in English. And these just happen to be grouped together. They all should be. All of these English volumes should be together. Okay, we have the Robert Fagles translation of the Iliad. This was the normal Black Spine Penguin Classic edition of this work. that sold a gajillion copies for Penguin. This did. We saw the Penguin Classic Deluxe edition of this, which is superior as a book in every single way. But they wanted to have it in the Penguin Classics Black Spine, row of books. So they brought out this. Why I have both, I don't know. Especially since I have the Fagles in hardcover as well. So, but anyway, and then we'll finish up for this shelf with the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Such a delight that they made this. This is translated by, this is the Wallace Budge translation from 100 years ago, from Egyptomania days, when Budge made a very tidy living by coming out with 50 million books about ancient Egypt. They just decided to stick with his translation. I wonder what a brand new 21st century, fresh, dust off the Budge, get rid of Budge, basically. I wonder what a get rid of Budge translation of the Egyptian Book of the Dead would be like. Probably I would be horrified by the result. Budge was very conscientious. So there you go. That is another shelf of Penguin Classics and a few others, a few non-Penguin Classics mixed in. And it marks a somber yet significant occasion here on this channel because it means that I'm moving. And you've only known me to live in Hyde Cottage, but unfortunately I will not be living in Hyde Cottage anymore. I will be living in just one part of Hyde Cottage, right here. Here's where I will poop. Here's where I will eat. Here's where I will read. And it'll only be in this little area that I walk Frida. She'll have to go round and round in circles because I can't get back up. So I am doomed to stay in this spot forever. Which works in your favor for the next couple of bookshelf tours because they're right in the area. It's just going to be a little lonely down here, that's all. But this is the kind of thing I suffer from my imaginary booktube friends. So I will see you tomorrow, frozen in this spot. Thank you, booktube.